believe that the UX community is tremendous at understanding people and their needs, and we're very good at imagining the future and envisioning how technology can be better for all of us. I'm really frustrated at how difficult it seems to be to get products and services out into the world as good as they could be. And I have an idea that it's easy for us as a community to reach out to the Agile community and work more closely together so that we can all make better products. I'd like to share with you some stories of my own Agile journey. Agile, when I first became interested in it, was kind of a theory and was cutting edge, and people were just beginning to try it. But over time, it's becoming more and more mainstream. Version 1 does a survey of software professionals, and they surveyed 4,000 software professionals for their 2012 survey, and they discovered that 83% of the people they surveyed were planning on implementing Agile in the next year. And many of these companies also already had Agile teams, 5 or more of them. So what does this mean for us? It means that if you're not already working on a project that has Agile software development involved in it, you're likely to encounter it. And I'm hoping that by sharing some of my experiences with you, you'll have some ways that you can approach this. Companies love Agile because the promise of Agile is that they'll be able to get products into the world faster. Instead of waiting months or years before they can show anything, they can get things done sooner. It provides a tremendous amount of visibility into the priorities of the technical organization. And by delivering features in smaller increments of value, it's possible to make course corrections. Many of us are familiar with Agile, if we've worked with Agile at all, as a series of practices. So for example, we hear about user stories, backlogs, pair programming, stand-ups. These are the activities and practices of Agile. But what fewer of us know is that we understand the motivations of Agile and where Agile came from. There was a collection of lightweight software development methodologies, such as XP and Crystal, that were trying to address the issues of sustainable pace for developers and continuous delivery of value, and trying to slow down the projects that so often were death marches and didn't produce anything of value and were miserable for the people that worked on them. A number of people who created these lightweight methodologies got together for a retreat in 2001 in Utah at a lodge called Snowbird to talk about their practices and how they worked together. And an interesting thing happened. Out of their meeting together, they created a document called the Agile Manifesto. How many people in the audience have ever seen or heard of the Agile Manifesto? A good number of you, I'm glad. When I first encountered the Agile Manifesto, I was really surprised because Agile is really rooted on a series of shared beliefs and values. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. So at its base, at its origin, Agile is about creating a more humane way of working, of stopping the death march. Unfortunately, my experience has been it's about creating a more humane experience for developers. And the rest of us who have to work with Agile projects sometimes still feel like we're on that death march, and we'd like to find the oasis. I believe that there's a tremendous amount of potential in Agile. We can connect to the values of Agile, because at its base, it's really about creating products that are worth building, creating products that produce user and business value. At its root, when it's practiced in an enlightened way, it's about collaborative and self-organizing teams. The promise of test-driven development and continuous deployment is that we as designers can finally have an opportunity to get do-overs. We don't have to make large, weighty specifications that then go into construction and something comes out the other end. We have an opportunity to work with a code base that's not fragile. And Agile's focus on reflection and improvement allows us to work and learn. This is all good, right? Unfortunately, many people in our community are not having this experience. I sent out a tweet before this event to ask UX designers, what do you find most frustrating about working with Agile teams? And they told me. So these are just some of the tweets I got back, that there's a resistance to revisiting work, that UX activities get truncated or locked down. It can feel like UX is bottlenecking. There's a lot of pressure. Somebody said that it's a little bit like feeding hungry hippos. It's hard, and I think many of us have shared this experience of feeling a little bit like we're victims to Agile. Several things that frustrate me about Agile is this incessant pressure to write code. I've actually had product owners come to me and say, "Psst, come over here. What can we design really fast? Because the devs don't have anything to do next week." And I'm like, oh, okay, we're doing what we do to keep the devs busy. That priority doesn't seem right. So it can feel a little bit like a software team needs to keep moving forward continuously, or it flounders. I'm also very frustrated that Agile can have an overemphasis on features, and the way that some teams manage the work through a backlog, they'll put a lot of unrelated features, and it's very difficult to do user experience work when you're working on this part of the product and this part of the product and this part of the product, because user experience is what happens with the interaction of those features and the interaction of the different pieces of the product in the different environments that people experience it. There's also the really nagging question of when is it done? There's a product owner who is the person who accepts the stories and says, okay, I'm done with that, move on. But where in Agile do we have any sort of a validation that what we're doing is useful to the people we're making it for, or it's actually delivering the business value that we want it to deliver? So these are frustrations that I have. Agile has a lot to say about building the thing right. Agile makes tremendous improvements in our ability to make quality code, to make it predictable, and to give teams a sustainable pace. Agile is silent on the question of building the right thing. There's many, many conversations right now around this topic of how do we build the right thing? How do we know that we're working in the right direction? And we're kind of in a cacophony of voices right now. You'll hear about lean startup, you'll hear about lean UX, UX strategy. I'm delighted to see that Tim Brown just recently started talking about how design thinking is becoming so popular in the enterprise. If you are working on a project, though, and you don't have a mandate to change the way things are, what do you do now? What can we do until the industry catches up with us again and we're able to integrate the whole process? In my own experience, I have learned to cultivate an Agile mindset. And by that I mean, I try to relate my work as a user experience professional to the values of Agile and try to reconnect with Agile practitioners to talk about how I want to support, at the end of the day, the same things that they do. This may seem a little overwhelming for me to say, oh, just get an Agile mindset. But I sincerely believe that the work that we do isn't valuable unless it comes out in the world. When I first started trying to do this, I was talking with my friend, William Petrie, who's an Agile coach, and he said, oh, Lane, it's easy. All you do is just everything you're doing now, but less of it and continuously. And it kind of broke my brain, because working in an agency context, I was used to having long cycles of research and long cycles of ideation and lots of time to kind of, let it mature and get it right. And the whole idea of compressing it down into a little time slice just really didn't make sense to me. But as I have worked with Agile teams now for over 5 years, I've kind of boiled it down into a mantra. I think about my UX practice, and every time I'm tempted to do something, I look and I say, how can I make this more quick? How can I make it more visual? How can I be more collaborative about my process? And how can I do this more continuously? And now I'm going to share with you 6 perspectives that I found useful in working with Agile teams. The first is, strive to be part of the team. And being part of the team is really about forming relationships with everyone in the team and being present. There's a lot of meetings that happen in Agile. There's stand-ups and there's iteration planning meetings. And being present in these conversations makes you available as a person to other people so that they can ask your opinion and you can provide value to the team. If you're lucky, you can start to introduce the work of design into the stories themselves. And I tend to see this work in a couple of phases. First, UX designers are present in the meetings and people hear about their work. And then at some point, you have separate UX stories. And then at some point, you're able to pull it all together and have stories that actually reflect the design and development work that's necessary to do something. It happens over time. If you think about it, every product decision that is made is really a design decision. And you want to be in the room when people are making those decisions, or you want to at least have an influence over the information other people have, so they're making good decisions. The second point is to create conversation. If you sort of think back to the Agile manifesto, this is like a primary aspect of Agile, thinking about conversations over comprehensive documentation. And any way that you can hack your practice so that it's more collaborative and more visual and more conversation-based, the stronger and more influence you'll have in projects. I'm always seeking to educate and empower the other people in my team by getting things up on the wall, walking them through the process. There was a really great quote from Sarah the other day when she said, "You can't create change by broadcasting. Change is created by input." And I definitely believe that. The more you create conversation around design and you hear other people, the more it goes in their head, the more they understand it and believe it. I want to lead with conversation and trail with documentation. I try to only create a document or a sketch or an artifact when it records an agreement I've already made with someone else in my team. I encourage you to think about your work as running a series of experiments. By being present and asking questions like, who is this for and when will they use it, you'll get people thinking about personas very naturally. By asking, how will we measure success, you'll get people thinking about the why of products. And you can sort of boil that down into think, make, check. Just look for opportunities in projects to bring that thinking forward. I'd like to see if we could change the conversation in Agile from how do we know if it's done to how do we know if it's good? How do we get that qualitative and quantitative validation that's necessary to create products that we can have confidence in? I've also found ways to reduce waste in my practice. By waste, I mean work that does not lead directly into something that I can show to an end user and validate. And my own practice sometimes uses sketching, sometimes uses wireframes. I still use Photoshop. Sometimes I'm working in styled HTML. But the point is, I'm trying to always use the right level of fidelity. As Andy Budd says, there's no high or low fidelity, just correct fidelity. I'll be what I call walking the stack. Even if the product is already live, I may be making some wireframes of it, or I may be roughing off a sketch of it. The point is, I'm choosing the lowest fidelity necessary to support the communication I'm having at the time. Eventually, you'll find a cadence. And you're trying to find a cadence that gives you, as the UX professional, a sustainable pace in the project. At some times, I'll be collaborating with the product owner, helping him or her envision the idea. And sometimes I'm collaborating with the people who are writing the code and trying to work out a subtle detail of an animation or a styling. I try to avoid creating pixel-perfect deliverables because it's faster and more effective just to sit down and pair with someone to figure that out. I'd like to talk about a concept of design refactor. In Agile projects, there's a concept called technical debt. Coders all realize that the first code you write may be sloppy or not well considered and doesn't understand the big picture. I'd like to introduce the idea of design debt, the idea that over time, if we're going to be making a contract with teams and saying, we'll give you our first impression and we'll work it out along the way, we need to acknowledge that our projects are taking on design debt. And we need to keep track of that and acknowledge that occasionally we need to do a design refactor and go through and improve everything. And working in not a bunch of user research up front and then never talking to users again, but working in ways to continually engage with users in the process. I like to say that talking to users should not be a special occasion. I encourage you all to expand your toolbox. I know this is very controversial. There's a lot of debate now about whether designers should be coders or coders should be designers. And I say, just be curious. You're all curious people. Code something. I took on figuring out how to have a WordPress site. And from there, I've grown into using HTML and CSS and jQuery and prototyping things in Bootstrap. And it happens if you have an opportunity to get hands-on. I encourage you to join other communities. Don't just hang out with UX people. Go to hackathons, go to meetups, meet technologists, spend some time. And a good way to reach out to that other community is to offer to teach what you know. Because you can teach a course on sketching or user research or personas, and they will be profoundly grateful that you came and spent time with them and shared something. And then they'll teach you something in return. The outcome of design is ideas. The outcome of writing code is software. The more we know about the material of construction, the more impact we can have on the way it looks when it's actually in the world. So here's my summary of the 6 tips. Photos up. So I've just taken you on a little journey, my own Agile journey, the things that I think about. I'm sorry, this isn't a process. I don't have a bunch of flowcharts and diagrams and crossing lines and things like that. There's no silver bullet. It's an internal change. You have to acquire your own Agile mindset. There is no right collaboration. Some projects I'm working shoulder to shoulder with my collaborators, and some projects, they're in different countries and I'm working on video conference. It's okay. Hold to your values, you'll figure it out. There is no right deliverable. On some projects, I find that I have to work in a more isolated way than I'm really comfortable with. I'll sketch for myself, I'll make wireflows and clickable prototypes, and then I'll walk people through with a wireframe walkthrough. Other times I have an opportunity to sit down with coders and sketch collaboratively, and then I'll work on the front end, HTML and styling, and they'll start working on the back end. It's all good. It's all coming from the same place. You don't have to be a superhero to do this. There is no right skill set. I have been doing this a long time, and I started out being afraid of sketching, and I started out being afraid of coding. But over time, I've gotten better at all of these things, and you can too. I entreat you to make products for people with people. There's a happy ending. I also asked my community what they find most rewarding when working with Agile teams. And some people are figuring this out. It can mean collaborating with creative and development, which means less ramp-up time and more feedback before building. It's pretty awesome. We do the usual stand-ups and sit with one another, or main development or creative, and we group, we talk a lot. Sketching and paper prototypes, usability in the hallway, speed, fluid nature, autonomy, design studios, and freedom to fail. Woohoo! Right? If we get it wrong on a waterfall team, we are done. If we get it wrong on an Agile team, we learn and correct. So what's the most frustrating thing about working on an Agile team? The fact that after learning Agile work, you'll hate every non-Agile project. So I wanted to thank you. This is a hat tip to a number of the people who inspire me and I see as collaborators. And if you're interested in joining us and learning more about this kind of work, I encourage you to look up some of us and follow along. Thank you very much for your attention.